Welcome to our new show, the What Anyone Can Do podcast with Leo Batari and me, Randy Cantrell. Our new show picks up where the last show, Year the Peer, left off, highlighting the simple truth that who you surround yourself with matters, and that if we enlist the support of others, give back to those who give to us, and pay it forward for the next generation, we can do anything. Author and keynote speaker Leo Batari and I will interview a diverse group of thought leaders who will share stories and insights that will help you succeed in business and in life. How? By doing the things anyone can do, but most of us never will. Welcome to another episode of What Anyone Can Do podcast. He is Leo Batari. I am Randy Cantrell. He is in San Diego. I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth. We are glad that you're here. We appreciate all the listeners, all our subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please go to the website Leo Batari. It's LeoBottary.com. And we've got a link there. Subscribe to the podcast. Super easy. iPhones, Android, it doesn't matter. We just appreciate all of our listeners, all of our viewers. Afternoon, Leo. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you today?
Really good.
Good. Well, it was so interesting, right? I know I'd mentioned to you that I was part of this virtual summit in January. It was called Career Mastery Kickstart, and Mae Bush runs it every year. In 2018, I know she had like 30 speakers as part of this virtual summit and had over 8,000 people. I know this year you had 50 speakers, including people like Marshall Goldsmith and Daniel Goleman, and it was great. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be invited to be among the 50 presenters, where basically what we do is we participate in a one-to-one 20-minute or so interview, and then there's like a 2 or 3 minute little video we do, regarding tips and all of that. But, she does such a great job with it. And it was really funny because just before, our getting on today, I noticed that she had a post on Twitter that talked about reframing, because she was talking about someone who, how do you take a difficult situation and kind of reframe it in your mind so that it just makes it a little more palatable,
right,
to attack. And so she was kind of looking for thoughts about how to do that. And of course, that's something we talk about in the book, because I think oftentimes it can be really helpful. It's hard for us, I think, in the moment to kind of go into that mode and reframe something on our own. But with the help of others, they can really show us how to see things, I think, a bit differently, and not in a way that's dishonest or in a way that is just, putting lipstick on a pig, if you will, but much more about how I can just have a different perspective that makes me think about this. And it is very much, I guess, whether you look at the glass half empty or half full, right?
Yeah.
And how you think about that. I remember an old story that I read one time. It was these two, shoe salesmen who were tasked with going to India to find out what do they think about potentially entering that market. And one of the shoe salesmen came back and said, no one's wearing shoes there at all. I can't see where this is a big deal. And the other guy comes back and says, awesome. There's the biggest need for shoes you could ever possibly imagine there. We're ready to go. So
yeah, exactly.
How one person saw, two different people saw the exact same circumstances was kind of interesting in terms of what that looked like, for them. But, I think people can have an enormous impact on how we see things and how it can help our attitude with getting things done.
Yeah, well, reframing can convert somebody from being a pessimist to an optimist, I think, or vice versa, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd mentioned to Mae, in fact, when we talked about the Mythbusters article in our last podcast, one of the stories that I shared in that was number 3, right? We were talking about busting the myth of keeping your eye on the prize. And the idea was that for my daughters, constantly fixated on the top of that mountain and looking at that goal and keeping their eye on the prize, as is often suggested to us as that's which we should do, that can come with some real challenges, right? Because when we constantly are looking at it, in the case of climbing a mountain, you can go and go and go, and then you look up and it doesn't look any closer than it did have. It's like a lot of work for not a lot of noticeable progress. And so unless you can reframe things, you're going to have a very difficult time getting up there. And it's not about whether you can do it physically or not, but just psychologically, it becomes extremely difficult. So the idea of, in that case, of talking to the girls about, hey, pick a starting point, climb for a while, instead of looking at that peak that never seems to be getting any closer, look behind you and see the kind of progress you made, and start framing it from that perspective and celebrating that success. And once they did that, it created an incredible burst of not only physical but emotional energy toward being able to continue, knowing that if they kept putting one foot in front of the other, they would make it to the top of the mountain. And I think people all of the time in work situations get to places where they can be really helped by just thinking, how do I reframe this issue so that it just makes it easier for me to manage, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, at least with just one other person, I mean, the ability to have one other person sit down at the table with you, with that being the goal, to me would make it infinitely easier, just because it's another pair of ears and set of eyes and thought processes, to look at the thing. I've gone into situations, and I know you have too, and naivete is often a blessing, especially when it comes to these kinds of topics. In my mind, the reframing something that people just naturally assumed. Many years ago, I was tasked to run a company in an industry that I had no knowledge. And so I came in just completely naive, and I asked every stupid question on the planet. They weren't stupid to me. I just didn't know. And I remember sitting down with, some vice presidents of some of the manufacturers, and they just looked at me, puzzled, and it made perfect sense to me. But other people in the company who had been in the industry for a long, long time were just kind of amazed at some of the conversations. I wasn't necessarily reframing it, but I kind of sort of was, because I just wasn't looking at the industry the way they did. I didn't have all that legacy and all that history. I think there's some value in being teamed up with somebody that, I mean, you see it in every space. You see all this disruption, whether it's the Ubers of the world or whatever, people who are not in that industry. I guess they have reframed that whole industry because they didn't have the baggage.
Oh, no question about it. And, and I think it can take other people, to your point, that can help us do that. You remember in the movie Apollo 13, you got Gene Kranz, who's the, flight director there at the time. And of course, the Ed Harris character is approached by one of the press guys or whatever, saying this could be the biggest disaster in NASA history. And he looks at him and says, I think it'll be our finest hour. And the difference isn't so much some kind of Pollyanna view. I mean, both of them understood the challenge ahead, but one framed it much more about how do we attack this challenge in the most positive kind of way, as opposed to being defeated about it out of the gate. And, I think whether it was the people on the ground or the astronauts up, in the capsule at the time, being able to approach something like that from a positive mindset can be that self-fulfilling prophecy, in many respects. Of course, in a few days, I'm headed to the UK. I'm speaking to actually a half a dozen Vistage groups there, largely in the Midlands. I'll be in Scotland, and which is why kind of the May Bush thing was so interesting. That
Sure.
tweet came today as I'm getting ready to head there. But so
and we'll put links in the blog post too for today's show.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Our listeners, so that you guys can check that out.
But on the way there, so I'm taking a overnight flight on Saturday night from DC, but before that, I'm flying Friday, and I'm meeting my daughter Taylor. We're running a half marathon together, and it'll be the first long race that we've done. It'll be a lot of fun, and but of course, just that it will be a lot of fun mindset versus this is going to be drudgery that we have to run. By the way, they should come up with another name for the half marathon. It's 13.1 miles isn't half of anything. It's a good way. Get in your car and drive 13 miles to see how far it is.
Yeah.
So it's but when you think about it, you've got to get on that starting line and you have to own that distance mentally, out of the gate. It doesn't matter what kind of physical shape you're in or whatever. It's how you prepare mentally and how you see how you're going to go about this. My oldest daughter, Kristen, actually ran a half marathon, and it was her first one. It was, several years ago. And actually during her particular race, she got to about the 11-mile mark and really began to tire and was kind of walking and running. And they're kind of meeting her in different areas in the course, and it was about, like I said, 11-mile mark. And of course she's telling me what she's going through, and I'm loath to kind of give her the parent advice in a moment where she's really not happy. As you might imagine, whenever you feel that way, it's not great. But she said to me, I'm just running as far as I can, and then I'll walk for a while, and then I run as far as I can, and then I walk. And I said, let me just offer this one thought. And I said, instead of doing that, I said, I want you to pick a spot, run to it, and I want you to declare victory, and then walk for a while, and then I want you to pick another spot and do the same thing. Finish the race that way. It's the difference between succumbing to repeated defeats and being able to celebrate along the way and hit goals and do what you want to do. So she looks at me like, all right. But she went and she did it, and she finished the race, said, okay, I got to give it to you. I've made it a heck of a lot easier to finish those last few miles when I attacked it that way versus feeling like this race owned me. And so, again, think about all the things that we run into at work. Think about, how we can try to engage others to help us reframe things in a manner that helps make it easier for us to be successful.
What's the difference between mental toughness and mental weakness? I mean, it is the stuff of mental toughness. I mean, your illustration just proves the point, which everybody applauds and looks for. Go back to you made a comment about owning it. What's the correlation, do you think, between reframing and that whole owning it thing? That comes up in a lot of my work with leaders who lament that they've got a workforce, that they really want their workforce to own the outcome, and they have great difficulty doing that.
Yeah, I don't think, I guess I wasn't speaking about it in the context of accountability or owning the outcome so much as is that you have to feel that you are up to and bigger than the challenge ahead of you, and not that the challenge is bigger than you are.
Right.
I think that
you've got control over your own destiny
really becomes the key. It's like when people say sometimes they wake up in the morning and they feel like either or at the end of a day they feel like that either they ate the bear or the bear ate them. It's right. And so, yeah. You kind of always want to feel that you were, on top of your day, on top of, any challenge that came your way, and not feel that sense of being overwhelmed and defeated that, we've all been through it. We've all been through moments where it's like, oh my God, how am I ever going to get through this? How am I ever going to deal with this? And, it can be helpful to step back. And again, I think usually, and I think most effectively with the help of others, say, how can I be thinking about this? How can I be seeing this challenge differently in a way that can help me get this done, and certainly get it done more easily and with a better attitude than not having the entire journey feel like it's god awful, right?
Is there some story that leaps out? I mean, you've talked about you and your daughter's climbing, the mountain. I mean, is there another story that leaps to your mind, to illustrate to people? I mean, maybe in a time in your life. I mean, I didn't prep you for this, but I'm curious. Any valuable reframing that's been done with someone else in your life?
I'm pretty sure, like all the time.
Yeah.
There's a question
Yeah.
of,
Yeah, that's what I was sitting here thinking before I asked the question. I thought, man, where do you begin?
yeah, that I have to think about this differently. So here's a reframing story that was kind of fun. A number of years ago, when I was at Hill and Knowlton, um, we were doing some work to help um, Disney parks and resorts basically update their crisis communications plans at a time where things had become so instantaneous with people posting videos and all of that it was no longer acceptable to wait 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours before posting a statement or something
Right.
after something went. So anyway, there was a competition for this whole thing. We ended up, our team that pitched the business at the time ends up getting it. So then we get all these crisis communications plans, and I'm home one weekend and I'm thinking about, okay, let's look at one of their current crisis communications plans and see what we got. Well, as you might imagine, it was excellent. I mean, this was really extremely well done. So
Yeah.
there was a little bit for me in that moment of like, oops, like be careful what you wish for now that we're going to take this and take it up a notch and somehow prepare them. But what was interesting was that night, it was a Sunday night, and I was a big fan at the time of the CSI Las Vegas. And I'm about halfway through the show, and I'm like, I got this now. Of course, the plan is great. What we needed to do was study the forensic evidence. So what we asked Disney to do was come up with, and literally back in the day, and this is in the early 2000s, so they had like boxes of stuff, right? It was tapes and press releases and articles and things like that. But we literally kind of went through the forensic evidence, if you will, to see how this plan held up against real life and what ended up happening and what the results were. And it was by studying the forensic evidence that actually allowed us to actually update the plan and make some recommendations that I think were beneficial. So again, having to reframe the challenge by not how do I make the plan better, it's how do I think about it in terms of how it held up against real life, study the forensic evidence, where then the issues will reveal themselves. So I think that was, a pretty big reframing. Another reframing that had came up with, it was actually during the fall semester. I teach a course at Rutgers that's essentially it's an e-portfolio / personal branding course that for graduate students who are really trying to look at how do the big brands do it? How can that relate to their personal brand? And then how can they kind of be their own client in, presenting themselves to the outside world in terms of who they are? And it was so interesting where there were a lot of the students they had created videos where they talked about themselves, and we had them practice kind of doing that. And I think half the students must have been talking about how work-life balance was so important to them, which, as I'm sitting here now, granted some generational differences and all, but as I hear that, I'm thinking that here's a student saying, "Hey, work-life balance, boy, is really important to me," and all. Which, in my mind, if I'm hiring someone or I'm a CEO or something like that, and I'm hearing that, it's like someone saying to me, "Yeah, I'm sure what you do is important, but I have a life too." And they're starting to say that, which doesn't exactly give you that all-in feeling that you're going to be part of the team, right? Mm-hmm. So I asked them to think about how can you reframe work-life balance? Like, what does that really mean? What are you really trying to say at the end of the day? And basically I said to them, look, what if you said instead, I am committed to excellence in every aspect of my life, personally and professionally, right? So that on one hand communicates all of the same sentiments about
Right.
work-life balance, but framed very differently so that it leaves entirely different impression on that hiring manager or CEO, whoever you're talking to, about who you are and what you're committed to doing. And the fact that you're not just there to perform whatever role and check off the box and whatever skills and duties might be there. You're there to make a difference because that's who you are. But you're also the kind of person who's going to make a difference with your friends and family and everything as well. And I think that becomes far more palatable, I think, than this idea of work-life balance. And I'm going to be, balancing things as if that's even a real thing. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I've not been terribly successful at always pulling that off. I've likened it to kind of a three-legged stool. I mean, you can balance on two, but if you get two legs off the floor, it's over. I mean, you're going to fall on your butt. It's at any given point, something it just demands more time and effort. But yeah, the perspective and I don't know, talk a little bit about the ability of reframing things in order for us to not just see things differently, but maybe even help us eliminate an area where we were just completely blind, because really what we're talking about, it seems to me, is possibility thinking, is just what's possible for me and what do I really believe is possible for me, as opposed to, man, there's just no way. There's just no way. I just don't see any way out of this.
So I've been involved in writing 2 books, right? And sometimes people will say to me, "Hey, I don't know how you take, no matter what it is," and particularly when they joke about like things like the power of peers and what anyone can do, which have been regarded as obvious topics. It's like, how do you make a book out of that anyway? But the idea of filling a few hundred pages, for example, and like, how do you take all these blank pages and fill 200, pages with it? I tend to look at it differently in that I've got the story I want to tell, but I have 2,000 pages of transcripts and notes and all that. I've got to figure out how I can take 2,000 pages and get down to 200 versus having blank and create 200 out of it, right?
Right.
So it's seeing the challenge, very, very differently, but feeling very empowered. I've got all this amazing content, and most of it not from me necessarily. Of course, it was, the lion's share of it were, in the case of What Anyone Can Do, from the podcast guests, and all of they contributed and everything they did and said. And all I had to do was, my challenge was to try to capture as much of that as possible and being able to weave it into a coherent story. But I didn't have to worry about blank page to full page. I was more about, how do I take all of these full pages and these incredible ideas and all this content and do something with it that creates a story that's really as approachable as Ryan Foland's cartoons that accompany every chapter. I mean, that to me was the big challenge of that.
Well, it's like, was it Michelangelo? And I may have this wrong, but it leapt to my mind, who talked about taking a block of stone.
Yep.
I mean, David's in there.
Yeah.
Just got to get rid of the other stuff, and David emerges.
And my understanding about that was a piece of stone that was rejected by as not being particularly of great value, and somehow. Right. He obviously saw something in it in terms of,
right.
He did pretty well with it,
Yeah. Well, there's a massive reframing for you. For sure. Yeah.
No, and I think time and time again, we know how much it helps us, and yet, just taking the time, engaging others to try to help us do that, and to make the effort at reframing something, even if we have to step back from the project just a bit, can make all the difference in the world. And it really is, I think extremely powerful. And it is what anyone can do, and it's certainly what anyone can do if they surround themselves with the right people who can help them do that. So, if you're
a leader, even if you're not a leader, if you're a coworker in the workplace, What are some practical things that leap to your mind that people in our audience could do, no matter if they're leaders or they're emerging leaders or whatever? If they see coworkers or a boss or anybody, struggling with how they're looking at something, what can we do to help one another better?
I think we can ask them questions. I think we can say, is there another way that you can is there another way to use that that you can see that challenge in front of you? Like, how do we think about it? So I'll give you a really a fun reframing example while we're thinking about this, right? So I started my career working on political campaigns. And what people used to do is they would, like, let's say that they were running the field operation for like a certain Senate district or congressional district or whatever. And what they do is they put that map up there, and it would be like this ginormous map of the Senate district, and it had these various things in it. And to them, it would be like this overwhelming territory that they had to hit all these spots and all. And so one day for fun, I took I think it was congressional district map down, and I put a map of the world on it, and I put the tiniest little dot, like pin of what my responsibility really was. And everyone laughed about it and all, but I said, all right, not so bad, right? I mean, in the scheme of things, I just get that little tiny area to worry about. I'm not thinking about it. It's like this. So I think helping as leaders and as coworkers, how do we help one another gain perspective even, right? Because sometimes it isn't just about taking a challenge and try to reframe it. Sometimes we can make things bigger than they really are. And we can, I think, say, all right, in the scheme of things here, let's really talk about what we got here and what we're doing. And you find out either by seeing it a bit differently or breaking it down into smaller bites that maybe this doesn't have to be so overwhelming after all. So I think we can help one another do those kinds of things. People are really good at, even people who make lists. All of a sudden someone goes into a day and they got a million things to do, and they become overwhelmed by that feeling. Some people do something as simple as they say, I'm just going to write down all these little things. I'm going to check them off as I go away. And I'm celebrating every time, right? I got another thing off the list, and I'm doing my thing. And at the end of the day, they feel like, hey, they've accomplished all of these things, and they actually have a visual record of it, and I think simple things like that, I think work wonders, for people in the workplace. And I'm going to be excited. Like I said, next week we'll talk a lot about this and other related issues with these Vistage groups that I'll be visiting in the UK. And really
tell us whatever you can about this trip. I'm pretty excited that we're going to try to do a show or two.
Well, we'll do a show or two there. And the hope, of course, is we'll do the next one from Scotland, and then we'll do one from the Midlands. I'll be with 6 different groups, largely in Scotland and in the more Birmingham, Nottingham areas of England. And
well, people definitely need to be following you on social media so we can see some of the pics.
And I talk about the workshop a bit in what anyone can do. It's basically a self-assessment workshop for peer groups. Could work for a Vistage group, could work for any other type mastermind group, peer group, or whatever, where no matter how high performing or high functioning they are, we all know as when we're part of any team, we can always get better, we can always improve. So what I do with this workshop is we take the 5 factors that essentially provide the framework for how and why peer groups are so successful. These are 5 common factors that or 5 factors that are common to high-performing peer groups. And they're essentially having all the right people in the room, having a safe and confidential environment, having valuable interaction which speaks to the quality of the issues and the discipline around which those issues are discussed, a culture of accountability, and that's not to whomever the leader of that group may be, but real accountability to one another. And then finally, for whoever is leading that group, we look at someone who provides a level of servant leadership, who's there for the group, not for his or herself, but also serves as the steward of those other four factors. And we do it with these groups for two reasons. One, and a big primary reason, is to say, all right, we have this great group here. How do we really take it up a notch? How do we maximize the value of the 8 hours we're spending here once a month? It's very valuable time. So how do we squeeze the most value possible out of it? The other thing is that these 5 factors that are so essential to the success of a group are also critical for high-performing teams, right? You frame it just a little differently. Again, talking about framing. One is having all the right people in the room and understanding what does it take to be successful in this organization versus those who may not make it, right? Second one speaks to really trust. You can hire really great people, but how do you get them to trust one another? Third becomes valuable interaction. In a group setting, it may speak to the quality of the issues and the discipline around which they're talked about. I think from a team perspective, I think about it in terms of productivity. You've got these people, they're great people, they trust one another. Are they being as productive as they could be? How are their meetings run? What does that look like? How many times have you talked to people where somebody will say, meetings are the bane of my existence, right? If I didn't have to go to one more meeting for the rest of my life, it would make my life that much better.
A lot.
And other places where someone says, meetings are crucial. It's the place where I find out what's going on. It's the place where my voice is heard. Right. And where we all understand what everyone's doing and how we march forward. So big difference there. Fourth, being a culture of accountability. When we look at any great team, I think whether it's in business or in sports, and we talk a lot about them in the book, there's a culture of accountability, again, not to the leader, but to one another as players, as employees, right? As family members for that matter, right? What commitment are we making to one another to make sure that we're a great team, a great family, whatever that happens to be? And then, finally, it's a great opportunity in a company situation for the leader to say, hey, what can I be doing to help you all be even more successful? What does that look like? Leave the room. Let them have a conversation about it. Let them really, and you're going to find a couple things. First of all, the leader's going to get some really great feedback on some things that leader can be doing to be helpful. But also what tends to happen during those conversations when the leader's been out of the room, and I've been able to hear some of these go on, is someone will say, I think the leader should be doing this, and I think the leader should be doing that. And 9 times out of 10, one of the employees will say, hold on now, we own that. That's on us. So you start to get this incredible shift that takes place between whether it's group members starting a meeting versus how it ends, or team members in the same situation, where there starts to be this sense of ownership and commitment and looking one another in the eye and making those promises. I'm going to be here and be prepared and be engaged and bring my A game all the time, right? Those things work wonders, whether it's for, a peer advisory or mastermind group, or for a team in your company. And I think the workshops have been really successful, in the U.S. I've done about 85 of them here. I'll be doing some in the UK and in Canada later this year. And they're just exciting because for me, it's not like delivering the same presentation over and over. Every group is completely different, and it makes it a lot of fun for everybody, I think, in that regard. So that's what I'll be doing, and I can, we'll send our first update. We'll do our podcast from Scotland next week. We'll see how our internet connection is and all, but that should be a great deal of fun.
We need lots of pictures in social media.
Oh well, yeah.
To follow you. So
we'll be sending the old pictures. It'll be great. But So
and there's links to Leo's Twitter over at his website. Leo, it's Leo Bottary, Bottary, LeoBottary.com. So we especially hope that you'll all next week. Here in the U.S., for a lot of folks, it's spring break. Kids are out of school, and so it's a great time to follow Leo on social media and see what he's up to.
That's what we're going to do.
There.
Maybe I'll Yeah, we'll figure something out for the podcast next week. We'll make it fun. But anyway, I think that's about it for today.
Yeah. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate everybody who clicks play. Again, go to the website. We encourage you to sign up for the free email list. Leo produces. We produce a monthly newsletter, so we'd be happy to send that to you. There's no charge, and we don't blitz your inbox. You get about one email a month from us. So we encourage you to do that. Share the word, spread the word. We're hoping to grow the podcast. So we're not just asking for you to grow. We're hoping to grow ourselves. So till next time, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
To learn more about our show and what we do, to submit questions to us, and to subscribe to What Anyone Can Do podcast, please visit our website, whatanyoneCanDo.com. What Anyone Can Do podcast is hosted by Leo Batari and me, Randy Cantrell. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod is Vibe Ace, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Thanks for watching or listening. We hope you'll share the podcast.